Alien vs Predator remains to this day exclusive to arcades. It's one of the most incredible and best examples of licensed mashup ever seen in a video game. It can be played by up to 3 players simultaneously that must choose from the 4 available characters, one of those based on Major Dutch, Arnie's character from the movie Predator. And again, back in the 80s and 90s, I was a sucker for everything Schwarzenegger related. Upon release, back in 1994, it was an instant success. Players would pile up and peek over each other's shoulders just to have a glimpse of the amazing gameplay that this game provided. Yes, the R-Type series had also one arcade exclusive game, R-Type Leo, released by IRAM in 1992. The first immediate impact is the colorful and bright visuals that really sets this game apart from its older and pale brothers. Besides that, it also introduced 2-player action, a new impressive and highly useful weapon named Force Bits, and when we die, we're not transported to the beginning of the level. Great news! And why wasn't R-Type Leo converted to home systems? Beats me! I would love to play it on my Amiga back in the day, and with that 2-player mode, it would certainly be on the top list of best multiplayer games ever made. IRAM went completely wild trying different stuff within the R-Type series, and I thoroughly applaud them. One of my favorite R-Type games to this day that can only be surpassed by the original, mainly because of its iconic bosses that still haunts my dreams. Also by 1992, Sega released this run-and-gun clone of Mercs by the name Desert Breaker, and that was probably the main reason for being extremely rare and never converted to home systems of the time. For instance, why did Sega license imported Mercs to the Mega Drive and not their own Desert Breaker? They were scared of a lawsuit, that's why. Controversy aside, I see it as an homage to Mercs, going further and expanding its formula with its own tweaks and tricks, like being able to flee from a highly complicated fight, granting a temporarily invincibility and speed. Weapons can also be upgraded, and we can even trade our grenades for special firearms. So if you're a fan of Mercs and other similar titles, you must try Desert Breaker. It's probably the pinnacle of the vertical run-and-gun style. Willow started as a movie written by George Lucas, directed by Ron Howard, and starred by Val Kilmer. It had several home versions released in 1988 alongside the movie for DOS, Amiga, Atari ST and the Commodore 64. A year later, an NES and arcade versions were developed and published by Capcom, both completely distinct from one another and from those aforementioned home computer games. And guess what? If you love Ghouls and Ghosts, you'll also love the arcade version of Willow. So beautiful and colorful, and with that same mechanics as Ghosts and Goblins and Ghouls and Ghosts. It's like being in heaven. It manages to follow the movie's plot quite well, in where we even play with different characters in different levels, each one with their unique fighting characteristics. And the fantasy-inspired soundtrack is really beautiful and captivating. Play it, you won't regret it. Previously in this episode, I mentioned Mercs, that is the sequel to Commando, a Japanese franchise from Capcom known on its native country as Wolf of the Battlefield. Many years later, by 1997, Saurus grabbed that same concept and brought us Shock Troopers, that by 2008 was included in the SNK Arcade Classics Volume 1, available for the PlayStation 2, PSP and Wii. Later, by 2011, was also included on the Neo Geo Classic line available for download for the PS3 and PSP, followed by Wii's Virtual Console service a year later, and in 2016 for Windows, iOS and Linux through Humble Bundle and Steam. But I wanted to play it home right after it was released on the arcades and not 11 years later. And I didn't saw it as a clone of Mercs or Commando, but as an homage to those two amazing games from the past, and even others like Ikari Warriors. Shock Troopers even improved the formula to a higher level, with multiple routes to reach the main objective for each stage, 8 distinct fighters to take into battle, and more. I don't want to spoil it for you, so grab it using one of the options mentioned earlier. And when talking about arcade-exclusive games, we must not forget GunForce II, the sequel to GunForce, obviously, and a masterpiece that can even humiliate blockbuster titles like Metal Slug and even Contra. And talking about Metal Slug, the team behind that game, then known as Nazca Corporation, is gossiped around the web to be practically the same that developed GunForce II a few years prior. Can't be sure about that. What I know is that GunForce II was Irem's last arcade game, and it feels like a predecessor to the Metal Slug franchise. The very first Metal Slug was probably supposed to be called GunForce III, but because Irem held the rights to the GunForce name, the team couldn't simply use it for future games. What really matters is that this is one of the greatest hidden treasures from the arcades, in where we control this mighty soldier carrying not one, but 2 guns simultaneously to blast the hordes of enemies that crosses our path. And I simply can't quite comprehend why people would prefer to save old beard men rather than poorly dressed babes. Totally incomprehensible. Why the original GunForce, subtitled Battlefire Engulfed Terror Island, was ported to the Super NES back in 1991 and its sequel wasn't, is beyond my comprehension. Here's another extremely popular game at the arcades back in '92 that never came home. Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder. This time around there are 4 characters to choose from instead of only 3: Goa the Giant, Sternblade, Dora and Little Trix the Elf. If we look carefully, we can spot Gilia's Thunderhead on Goa's back. As the title suggests, we're up against Death Adder once again. He returned to regain possession of the Golden Axe and built a giant castle at his own image. Magic spells were redone and multiple paths were introduced in where the Unchosen Ones may appear later in the game. And there were different versions of the cabinet that would allow up to 4 players simultaneously. It would have been awesome to play the Revenge of Death Adder at home, at least on the Sega Mega Drive Genesis, that was the only platform that received Golden Axe 2 back in the day. Being an arcade exclusive really excluded and prevented many fans of the series to keep up with the story. And a year later, Golden Axe 3 was also released in Japan for the Mega Drive and in '95 through the Sega Channel online game service for the Genesis. But chronologically and despite arriving before Golden Axe 3, The Revenge of Death Adder is most likely the 4th game in the series. Let's travel a few years back and land in 1990 and in this glorious vertical land shooter. Again, Outzone is one of my top 26 favorite arcade games ever made, mainly due to its concept, playability and freaking awesome soundtrack. Toplan is probably best known for the lovely Snow Brothers, and Outzone is a sort of evolution from the studio's traditional shoot-em-ups like Fire Shark. And what an evolution it was! Outzone is gorgeous in all respects, also extremely difficult, cause it will send bullets flying your way from all directions, leading you to dead ends, from where there's no possible escape. It's a complete mystery why Outzone was never converted to home consoles and computers. What Cadillacs have to do with dinosaurs, you may ask? What I know is that it was based on a rather successful comic book named Xenozoic Tales, set in a post-apocalyptic future that spawned a not as successful animated series from CBS. And alongside with the animated series, Capcom released an arcade video game that glued players to the screen with so much simultaneous action through these beautifully detailed scenarios. And 3 players could join in and beat the hell out of enemies and also engage the dinosaurs that inhabit this hostile alternative future. Sadly, it remained an arcade-exclusive game that I would have loved to play back in the day on a Nintendo or Sega console. One of my favorite arcade coin-op games that I've included in my personal top 26 arcade games episode is Aliens by Konami, released in 1990. This was a totally different game from the ones that were available for home computers 3 years prior by Activision, Software Studios and Square, all hoping to cash in on the hype around the astonishing movie by James Cameron. This one was highly focused towards action, and some elements didn't even resemble the movie in which it was supposed to be based, like the presence of zombies, for instance. Sure that in the movie we had these infected humans, but they would simply stay put and not chase us down like maniacs. But not being true to the motion picture isn't a bad thing. On the contrary, it's highly frenetic, intense and even scary. If we exclude these pink aliens. Did the guys from Konami even watch the movie? And a blonde Sigourney Weaver? What the hell? So guys, here you have it, my 10 favorite exclusive and impressive arcade games that should have been adapted, converted, ported, whatever, to all home systems available during their respective hype periods, and not decades later like Shock Troopers that only came home 11 years after its original arcade release. By then, as you can imagine, all my hype for the game had already vanished. And if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to smash that like button, to subscribe to the channel, to share your own personal favorite exclusive games from the good old arcades, and to click on that bell icon, so that you're notified when all my future content becomes available. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in my next video. Cheers!